Welcome to my course, Game Development Basics, Week 6, Lesson 6, Create Bomb and Bomber. In this lesson, it's going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to create a new enemy type called a bomb, and then we're also going to create an enemy type called bomber that can drop the bombs into the level. So let's get started by making our bomb. Here I am back in our project, and the first thing I'm going to do is take our enemy base, and I'm just going to right click and say create child, and we'll call this BP bomb. For our static mesh, I'm just going to use a sphere, and in the starter content there's a material called tech panel. So this is what I'm going to use just to make it look kind of like a bomb, and I just want to rotate it so that front part is visible. And let's drag one of these into the world so we can see what it looks like. And I think that's way too big for our bomb, so let's make it just maybe a quarter that size. And the next thing is, I don't want it to be moving, but I can't remove this floating pawn movement component because it was inherited from our enemy base class. But what we can do is just put the speed down to 0, and now it will just be stationary. And I also just want to take our box collision and make it about the size of our sphere. Now again, this is inherited from enemy base. If you wanted to be super picky, you could just swap this out instead for a sphere collision, or just disable this and use the static mesh for the collision. It's really up to you. I think it's fine for what we're doing. In our enemy base class, on begin play, we call AI handling. We're not really going to need that for this enemy, so we can just remove this begin play from the parent, and this is where we will start creating this bomb. And for that, let's talk through what we want our bomb to do. What I would like is a bomb that has a timer, and after that timer has elapsed, the bomb will explode and send some projectiles into the world. To handle this, I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to call this ignite bomb. And we want this to do two things. We want the first thing to be to create the projectiles, and then we want it to destroy itself. So we can use a sequence node for this, and that will allow us to break out each of those actions into a separate sequence. So we know that we want the first pin to handle creating the projectiles. So let's just drag off this and type destroy actor, and that way this will destroy itself. In the first part of that, we want it to create a number of projectiles that move out from it in a circle. And we want this to be somewhat adjustable, so we have different bombs that could do different things. The first part of this is we need to create that projectile, and it's going to be pretty basic, similar to the projectile that we used for our laser cannon. So I can actually just right click on this and say create child, and I'm going to call this BP bomb projectile. And I actually want this to be in the enemy folder, so I'm just going to drag it right into there. And I don't want this to move quite as fast, so I'm going to lower this down to something like 500. And also, I don't necessarily know that I want it to have this laser beam, so I'll create a new particle for this, and we can just use single looping particle. And I'll just make it a little bit larger so it's easier to see. And that looks like it should work for what we need. So now that we have the bomb projectile, we can go back here and we can start writing the function for how we're going to spawn those. And I want it to spawn multiples, and I want this to be an adjustable value, how many it's going to spawn. So I want to drag off here. I'm going to type do n. And you'll notice there's a node called do n. And this will allow us to set a number of times that it will do something. So let's drag off this and create this as a variable. And we're going to call this number of projectiles. And we want this to be spawn actor. And the actor we're going to spawn is our bomb projectile. Let's split our transform, and that way we have access to location, rotation, and scale. For scale, we'll leave as 1, 1, 1. For location, we're going to say get actor location. and we'll leave that as self. And then for the rotation, this is where we're actually going to impact how these projectiles are spawned. So let's split this out, and we can write a pretty simple function that impacts the rotation at which these projectiles are spawned, and then they should move out from the center in that set rotation. And because we have a counter, this is going to be going up to the number of projectiles until it gets to the end. So we could actually use this counter number to impact the rotation. So let's drag off here and type divide. And we'll move this to the bottom pin. If we take 360, which is the number of degrees in a circle, and we divide it by the number of projectiles, that's going to give us equal segments in a circle. So if this is 4, they'll be at 90-degree angles. If it's 10, they'll be at 36-degree angles, and so on. Then we could take the counter number and multiply it by that angle, and that'll give us a set angle at increments. And the last thing we need to do is just plug this into the Z rotation. So now we have a do n, which is going to be based upon a number of projectiles. We're going to divide 360 by that number to get set angles divided equally in a circle. Then we're going to take the counter number and multiply it by that new angle that we've created, and then put that as the Z rotation. Now, I can't remember if we've used a do n function so far in the course, but basically it's pretty simple. It's just going to keep doing something until n number of times has passed. Now, these can be very useful, but one thing to know is that if we're using it in this implementation, we actually need this to be a loop. So we'll drag off here. I'm just going to take a reroute node so it's easier to see, and we'll plug it back into the input. So now what's going to happen is it's going to enter here, it's going to do it once, loop back, and keep going until we reach the number of projectiles. And then when that's done, we'll go to the next thing in our sequence, which would be to destroy actor. The last thing we need to do is just set up this timer. So let's say set timer by function, and the function name is going to be ignite bomb. And the time, let's just set it to 5 for now. And this is going to be basically the fuse of the bomb. So let's actually make this a variable and call that. All right, and we're just going to fix a few things that were wrong with this. I've done a little bit of troubleshooting to figure out where the issues were. So the first thing is we need to actually set number of projectiles to something. I set this to 10 for now. You can always adjust this and see what works for you. The next thing is when we're spawning our projectile, we want to change the collision handling override to always spawn ignore collisions. And the reason for this is we're going to be spawning all these essentially in the same exact location, and we don't want that to cause some weird behavior. So we're just going to override and say always spawn them. And the last couple things are in our bomb projectile that we made. Now, if we go to projectile base, the begin overlap is going to check if there's an enemy, and then it'll apply damage. We actually want this to apply damage to the player instead. So I've removed the parent behavior and just rewrote the same thing, but to cast a player instead. And then I found that our Niagara system didn't look exactly the way I wanted it to. So I actually just put this to none, and you can do that by just hitting clear here. And then I made a sphere that's just about the same size, and that will give us, I think, a better visual representation. So now if we go into our game and we wait 5 seconds, we'll notice that this bomb will go off and it will send those projectiles into the world. And if we go to our bomb and we set this number of particles to something like 30, we'll notice that there's substantially more projectiles being created. So that's our bomb. The last thing that I would like to do is to create some type of visual representation for the player so that they know how much time they have left until the bomb goes off. Let's go into our UI folder and we'll create a new widget, and we'll just call this bomb timer. Let's go in here and we're just gonna add one element that's gonna be a text element. We'll change the size to desired, and let's create a variable for this timer. So we'll just call this timer. and this will be a float. And let's set this to instance editable and expose on spawn. And for this, we could just create a binding, and the timer will be bound to the text of this number. And I want to be counting that down over time. So I'm going to create a custom event, and it's going to be called countdown. I'm going to take my timer, subtract 0.1, and then set that as my new timer. And I want to set timer by event to 0.1 and make this looping. So now we have a widget that just has one element. It's going to be a text based upon the time left in the bomb. And this is just going to do a countdown function that counts down in 0.1 second increments. But we want this to be displayed for the player on the bomb. And we're actually able to do this by adding a widget component. And if we set that location to slightly above the bomb and then set the space to screen, we'll actually have that widget shown here. And we can set the widget class to bomb timer and set the draw size to 100 by 100. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to take this fuse timer and we need to set it on that widget. So if we pull off here and we type bomb timer, we can actually cast to our bomb timer widget. And we want that to be this widget here. And then we'll set timer to the fuse timer. And just a quick fix, we actually need to do the widget here and then say get widget, and then we can cast that to bomb timer. And now we'll see that our timer is counting down with the timer, and when it reaches 0, the bomb will go off. And I just want to change one thing on my text. I actually just want to make it center justified, and that way it's right over the bomb. All right, and the last thing I want to do is just create an enemy that can spawn these bombs. So I'm going to right click on my enemy base, say create child blueprint class, and we're going to call this BP bomber. And for my bomber, I want it to be a little bit bigger so it's a little bit ominous. And I'll just change the material to something different just so it stands out. We'll make the bombers green. Again, this is just a prototype, so we don't need to do anything fancy. The bomber is going to have one additional component, and it's going to be a scene component. And I just want this to be right at the end of the bomber, and we're going to call this bomb spawn location. And there's really not that much to this that we need to do differently. All we want to do is on begin play, we just want to set up something where it will spawn a bomb in increments. So let's create a new function, and we'll call this drop bomb. And all drop bomb is going to do is spawn actor, and this is going to be a bomb. Let's split this so we can gain access to these. And all we want to do is take our bomb spawn location, say get world location, and plug that into here. Now on begin play, we'll set timer by function, call this drop bomb. And then this timer is just going to be how often do we want it to drop a bomb. Let's set it to something like 3 seconds. And I actually want to make this a variable called bomb timer. And let's just drag one of these into the world so we can see how this works. It's moving a little too fast. And there we can see it's dropping a bomb every 3 seconds. Now again, there's a lot of customization here. So we, for instance, might want to set this up as an instance editable variable. And that way, as we're putting them into the world, we can set the bomb timer. You can now set these bombers to spawn at your enemy spawner locations on these triggers. You can do a variety of things. Additionally, the bomb, we can set this fuse timer as instance editable, and that way when we put them into the world, we can change that to be a different value. There's a lot of customization available, and we can see that our game already is taking shape to be something where you can really start to make it your own thing. In the next lesson, we're going to spend some time creating a modification system that will allow the player to use the currency that they're gathering to make upgrades to their ship. So I hope you're still enjoying the course, and I will see you in the next lesson.